The first time I saw him, he was trying to make me leave. I was on my knees in the garden, if you could call it that, more thorn than bloom, more ruin than refuge, pulling dead roots from soil that hadn't been turned in years. My sleeves were pushed past my elbows. My hair had come loose from its pins an hour ago, and I had stopped caring 30 minutes before that. I heard the boots before I heard the voice. "You are trespassing." I looked up, and the ground beneath me shifted. Not literally, but something in my chest rearranged itself so quickly I lost my breath. He stood at the edge of the broken gate, tall and severe in a dark coat that looked like it cost more than every possession I had carried here combined. His face was cut from cold marble. High cheekbones, a jaw set so tight I could see the muscle working beneath the skin. Dark hair, slightly too long for fashion, as though he had stopped caring about mirrors some time ago. But it was his eyes that undid me. Grey, not soft grey, not silver. The grey of the sky before a storm. Heavy, charged, warning you to get inside. Those eyes looked at me like I was a problem he intended to solve quickly. "I beg your pardon," I said, still kneeling in the dirt like some peasant supplicant, which I suppose was not far from the truth. "This land belongs to the Duke of Ashworth." His voice was low, clipped, the kind of voice accustomed to being obeyed without repetition. "This cottage belongs to the Duke of Ashworth. You are neither invited nor welcome. I suggest you gather your things and leave before I am forced to involve the magistrate." I stood, slowly. I wiped the soil from my hands onto my apron and looked at him directly, which I could see surprised him. "And you are?" Something flickered in his expression, a crack so brief I almost missed it. "I am the Duke of Ashworth." Of course he was. I should explain how I came to be kneeling in a duke's forgotten garden, pulling dead things from the earth like a woman with nowhere else to go. Because I was a woman with nowhere else to go. My name is Eleanor Graves. 6 months before I arrived at that cottage, I had a home, a father, and a life that, while modest, was mine. My father was a country physician, well-read, well-liked, poorly paid. We lived in a rented house outside Cheltenham, and I kept his books, managed his patients when he was too ill to ride out himself, and pretended not to notice that his cough was getting worse. He died on a Tuesday in February, quietly, in his chair, with a half-finished letter to a colleague on his lap. The landlord gave me 4 weeks. My father's older brother, Uncle Edwin, gave me 3. "You'll come to live with us in Hertfordshire," he wrote, in a letter that arrived before my father was even buried. "Margaret'll find a use for you." Margaret was his wife. The use she had in mind was unpaid governess to their 4 children, combined with household servant, combined with silent, grateful dependent, who would eat last, speak least, and never forget the enormous charity being extended. I lasted 5 months. It was not the work. I have never been afraid of work. It was the way Margaret spoke to me in front of her children, as though I were a cautionary tale. This is what happens to women without husbands or money. This is what you become. It was the way Uncle Edwin looked at me when Margaret was not in the room, his gaze lingering in places it should not have. And it was the night he came to my door, smelling of port and entitlement, and told me I ought to be more grateful. I left before dawn, with 1 trunk, £11, and a name I had found in my father's papers. Mrs. Hargrove, a former patient who had once written to say she owed him a debt she could never repay. The letter included an address, Briarfield, near the village of Thornash, on the southern edge of an estate belonging to someone called Ashworth. Mrs. Hargrove had died 2 winters past. I discovered this from the vicar's wife in Thornash, who looked at me with the particular pity reserved for women arriving somewhere with luggage and no plan. But the vicar's wife also told me something else. There was a cottage on the Ashworth estate, the old dower cottage, she called it, that had been empty for years, since the Duchess died. No one went near it. The Duke had given orders that the entire south meadow was to be left alone. "He cannot bear to look at it," she said, dropping her voice. She loved that garden. I walked there that afternoon. The cottage was small, stone, half swallowed by ivy. The windows were intact. The door was warped but functional. Inside, dust, damp, a hearth that would draw once the chimney was cleared, and a silence so deep it felt almost like peace. I moved in that night. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would write to someone, find a position, make a proper plan. But the truth I did not admit for weeks, was that I had stopped believing proper plans were available to women like me. Women with no family, no fortune, no husband, and no willingness to purchase safety by tolerating a man's hands in the dark. So I stayed. I cleared the chimney. I scrubbed the floors. I started pulling the dead things from the garden. And 3 weeks later, the Duke arrived to throw me out. He did not throw me out. That is the part I still cannot fully explain, even to myself. He stood at that broken gate with his magistrate threats and his storm-grey eyes, and I stood in the ruined garden with dirt under my fingernails and absolutely nothing left to lose. And something happened that neither of us expected. I was not afraid of him. I should have been. He was tall, powerful, titled, and visibly furious. Every instinct bred into a woman of my station said curtsy, apologize, beg. But I had spent 5 months curtsying and apologizing and very nearly begging in my uncle's house, and I had learned exactly what it purchased. So instead, I said, "The cottage has been empty for years. The roof needs mending, the garden is dead, and the nearest tenant is 1.5 miles east. I am not troubling anyone. You are troubling me. With respect, Your Grace, you did not know I was here until today, which means I troubled you only when someone told you to be troubled." That crack again, wider this time. His jaw shifted, and for one breath, I thought I saw something behind the anger, something that looked almost like exhaustion. "You have 1 week," he said. Then he turned and walked back through the meadow without waiting for a response. 1 week. I should have packed. I should have used that week to find a position in the village, a governess post, a companion row, anything with walls that legally belonged to me. That would have been the sensible course. Instead, I cleared the rest of the garden. He came back on the 4th day. I was not expecting him. I was inside the cottage this time, mending a tear in the curtain I had fashioned from an old bedsheet, when I heard the same boots on the path. Heavier this time. Slower. As though he had been arguing with himself the entire walk from the main house, and had not yet determined who won. I opened the door before he knocked. We stood there for a moment, separated by the threshold, and the late afternoon light caught his face at an angle that made him look younger, less carved from stone, more human. He was carrying something, a small wooden crate, which he set down on the step between us without ceremony. "Provisions," he said, as though the word offended him. "Mrs. Calloway, my housekeeper, was informed of your situation by the vicar's wife. She insisted. And you are merely the delivery boy. His eyes snapped to mine. For one terrible, electric second, I thought I had gone too far. Then, and I would have missed it if I had blinked, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, not even close, but the ghost of where a smile might once have lived. You have 3 remaining days, he said. I am aware. He looked past me into the cottage. I saw his gaze catch on the cleaned hearth, the swept floor, the wildflowers I had placed in a chipped cup on the table. Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, but a kind of recognition, as though he was seeing the cottage for the first time in years, and it was not what he expected. She planted roses along the south wall, he said quietly. I did not ask who. I already knew. The roots are still alive, I said, beneath the dead growth. I found them yesterday. He looked at me then, really looked, not the dismissive assessment of our first meeting, but something deeper and far more dangerous. A look that said, who are you? And why are you standing in her garden, saying things that make my chest hurt? He left without another word. But he did not mention the 3 days again. The week passed, then another, then a third. He did not ask me to leave. He did not come back to the cottage. Not directly. But I saw him. On the ridge above the south meadow, walking alone at dusk, a dark figure against a sky turning violet and gold. He walked there most evenings, I learned. The same route, the same solitary circuit, as though he were keeping vigil over something only he could see. Mrs. Calloway came on the 8th day. She was a stout, sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, who arrived with a second crate of provisions, and a manner that suggested she had opinions about everything, and shared them selectively. He hasn't spoken to anyone about you, she said, unpacking bread, cheese, and a jar of preserved plums with brisk efficiency. Not the steward, not the solicitor. In my experience, when His Grace does not speak about something, it means he is thinking about it constantly. He wants me gone. If he wanted you gone, Miss Graves, you would be gone. He is the Duke of Ashworth. He has a steward, a solicitor, a magistrate who dines at his table, and 60 men on this estate who would do anything he asked without question. She set the plums on the table with a decisive thud. You are still here. Draw your own conclusions. I drew nothing. I could not afford conclusions. I could only afford to keep the garden alive and hope that silence continued to serve as permission. But I thought about what she said. I thought about it far more than I should have. The first time we were truly alone, not a doorstep exchange, not a passing encounter, but alone in a way that the rules of his world would never have permitted. It was because of the rain. September had turned cold and wet. I had walked to the village for thread and salt, and on the return path through the estate's eastern wood, the sky opened with the kind of sudden violence that gives no warning. Within minutes, the path was a river. I pressed myself beneath a broad oak and waited. That is where he found me. He was on horseback, returning from somewhere, his coat already darkened with rain. He pulled the horse up short when he saw me and sat there for a moment, water streaming down his face, looking at me sheltering beneath the tree with an expression I could not read. Get on, he said. I beg your... The river path floods within the hour. You will not make it back to the cottage on foot. Get on the horse, Miss Graves. It was the first time he had used my name. I felt it land somewhere beneath my ribs. warm and startling, like a key turning in a lock I had forgotten existed. He kicked his foot free of the stirrup so I could mount. I placed my hand on his offered forearm to pull myself up, and even through the wet fabric of his coat, I felt the heat of him. Solid, immediate, shocking. I settled behind him on the saddle, and there was no way to sit that did not involve pressing against his back. He went rigid. Neither of us spoke. The rain hammered down around us, and his horse picked its way carefully along the higher ground. I could feel the rhythm of his breathing, too controlled, too measured, as though he were counting each inhale. My hands rested at his sides because there was nowhere else to put them. Through the soaked layers of his coat and waistcoat, I could feel the movement of his ribs, the warmth of his body, the tension locked through every muscle in his back. The ride to the cottage took perhaps 12 minutes. It felt like an hour. It felt like 30 seconds. When we reached the gate, he dismounted first and offered his hand to help me down. I took it. My boots hit the ground, and he did not release my fingers immediately. Half a second. Perhaps less, but I felt it. The hesitation. The almost imperceptible tightening of his grip before he let go. "Thank you," I said. My voice did not sound like my own. "The path floods," he said again, unnecessarily. "Do not walk it in weather." Then he rode away through the rain without looking back, and I stood at the gate of the cottage with my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my wrists, and knew, with the kind of certainty that arrives like a diagnosis, that I was in terrible danger. Not from the river, not from the rain, from the way his hand had felt around mine, and the devastating knowledge that I wanted him to come back. He began finding reasons. A fallen branch across my path that he happened to clear while passing. A book left on the cottage doorstep. Cooper's poems, battered and well read, with no note. A message through Mrs. Calloway that the estate carpenter would mend the cottage shutters, by the dupe's instruction, as a matter of property maintenance. Property maintenance. As though I could not hear what he was really saying beneath every practical excuse. And then, 3 weeks after the rain, he knocked on my door at dusk and asked if I would walk with him. I should have said no. Every rule, every instinct, every lesson I had ever learned about the distance between a duke and a physician's orphan daughter said no. I said yes. We walked along the south meadow as the light failed, and he told me about her. Charlotte, his wife. The Duchess of Ashworth, dead 3 years this November. She was ill for 2 years before the end, he said, his voice flat and careful, as though he were reading a report about someone else's life. A wasting disease the physicians could not name and could not treat. I brought 7 doctors to this house. I took her to London, to Bath, to a man in Edinburgh who claimed he could cure anything. None of them could help her. He stopped walking. We had reached the ridge where I had watched him pace on so many evenings, and the view opened before us. The valley, the village lights beginning to glow, the dark line of the river. She spent her last good autumn in that garden, he said, planting things she knew she would never see bloom. I said nothing. There was nothing adequate to say. After she died, I closed the cottage. I could not. He stopped. His jaw worked. I could not look at it, at what she had made growing there, knowing she was in the ground. "You let it die," I said quietly. He turned to me, and his expression was stripped bare. No coldness, no authority, No marble composure, just grief, raw and enormous, held behind a wall that was cracking in front of me. "I let everything die," he said. We stood there in the falling dark, close enough that I could see the pulse at his throat, close enough that if I had reached out, my fingers would have touched his chest. I did not reach out. He did not move. But something passed between us in that silence, an understanding so complete it felt almost physical. Two people who had lost everything, standing on a ridge in the dark, terrified of what it might mean that they had found each other. He walked me back to the cottage. At the door he paused. "The roses," he said. "You said the roots were still alive." "They are." He nodded slowly. "Then perhaps some things survive." He left, and I pressed my back against the closed door and covered my mouth with both hands and breathed through the shaking. Because I understood now what was happening, and it was both the most beautiful and the most frightening thing I had ever felt. October brought Lady Catherine Ashworth. His mother arrived at the estate in a black lacquered carriage with 2 trunks, a lady's maid, and a disposition that could have frozen the Thames. I did not meet her. I was not the sort of person who met duchesses. But I heard about her from Mrs. Calloway, who reported the household developments with the grim relish of a war correspondent. "She has heard about the cottage," Mrs. Calloway told me on a Tuesday morning, her face tight. "About you." "Who told her?" "Mr. Pemberton, the steward. He writes to her once a month, always has. Loyal to her before he was ever loyal to his grace." Something cold moved through me. What did he tell her? That an unmarried woman of no family and no fortune has been living on the estate for 2 months with the Duke's apparent knowledge and no formal arrangement. Lady Catherine is not a woman who tolerates ambiguity, Miss Graves. She sees a threat to her son's reputation, and she has come to remove it. The word remove landed like a stone in water. I felt the ripples spread through my chest. Has she spoken to him? She speaks. He listens. Whether he agrees is another matter. Mrs. Calloway hesitated, the first time I had ever seen her uncertain. But she is his mother, and she is not wrong about the danger. If this becomes known beyond the estate, a young, unmarried woman living in the Duke's cottage, visited by the Duke himself, the scandal would destroy you, not him. You. I knew this. I had always known this. The rules of his world were perfectly clear. Scandal flowed downward. A duke might weather whispered gossip. A woman like me would drown in it. Lady Catherine came to the cottage on a Thursday. She did not knock. She opened the door as though she owned it, which, I supposed, in a sense she did, and stood in my small, clean room with her gloves still on, and her gaze cataloguing every surface like an assessor valuing wreckage. "Miss Graves?" She did not wait for confirmation. "I understand you have been here since July." "Yes, my lady." "By what arrangement?" "None, formally. I found the cottage empty and helped yourself. Yes. I have the picture." She removed one glove, finger by finger, with the precision of someone preparing a surgical instrument. "My son has not asked you to leave. He has been generous." "My son is not generous. He is grieving, and grief makes men foolish." She looked at me directly for the first time. Her eyes were the same grey as his, but without the storm. Hers were ice, clear, still and cutting. You are an attractive woman in proximity to a lonely man. This is not a complicated equation, Miss Graves. With respect, my lady, nothing improper has... I did not ask what has happened. I am telling you what will happen. If you remain here, there will be talk. If there is talk, there will be scandal. If there is scandal, it will attach not to my son, who is a duke and may do largely as he pleases, but to you. You will be ruined. You will become the woman who ensnared a grieving widower. You will never secure a respectable position, a respectable marriage, or a respectable life. And my son, her voice thinned, my son will carry the guilt of that, on top of everything else he already carries. She laid an envelope on the table. I could see the edges of banknotes inside. £50, enough for a year's lodging in any respectable town, with money remaining for a wardrobe and letters of introduction. I will write them myself. You will have references from a dowager duchess. That is not nothing. £50. It was more money than I had seen in my life. It was freedom, security, a future built on something other than a duke's fragile tolerance and my own dangerous hope. I stared at the envelope. My hands were shaking, and I pressed them flat against my skirt so she would not see. I need to think, I said. You need to leave, she said, but I will give you until Saturday. She left the envelope on the table. She left the cottage without looking back. I sat at the table for a long time after she had gone, staring at £50 and trying to understand why it felt like a blade at my throat, rather than a hand reaching down. I did not tell him about his mother's visit. This was a mistake. I knew it was a mistake even as I made it. But I could not bear to see his face when he learned that the world was closing in, that the fragile, impossible, unnamed thing between us had been noticed, assessed, and marked for destruction. He came to the cottage that evening. He had been riding. His boots were muddy, his hair windswept, and he stood at the gate looking at the roses I had coaxed back to life along the south wall. They were not yet blooming, but the green was vivid, insistent, pushing through the old dead wood with a determination that felt almost defiant. You have done something remarkable here, he said quietly. I pulled out the dead things and gave the living ones room. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw it. Everything he had not said, everything he could not say, everything the world he was born into forbade him from saying to a woman like me. Eleanor? My name, not Miss Graves, not the formal address that kept proper distance between a duke and a dependent. Eleanor. Spoken low, almost rough, as though it had been caught in his throat for weeks and had finally forced its way out. I could not breathe. Your Grace. James. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of darker grey in his eyes, the faint scar along his jawline, the way his chest rose and fell too quickly. If you are Eleanor, then I am James. At least here, at least between us. James. It felt like a confession, like lighting a match in a room full of powder. He raised his hand. His fingers hovered near my jaw, not touching, not quite, a fraction of an inch between his skin and mine. I could feel the heat of his hand like a held breath. The entire world narrowed to that impossible distance. I swore, he said, and his voice was wrecked. After Charlotte. I swore I would never... I know. I cannot offer you what you deserve. My mother, society, I know. Then why are you still here? I met his eyes. Because the roots are still alive. His hand dropped. He stepped back. The distance opened between us like a wound, and I watched him fight a war with himself that played out across every line of his body. The clenched fists, the rigid shoulders, the jaw set so hard I thought his teeth might crack. He turned and walked away. He did not look back. But he had said James, and I had said it back. And we both understood that something had changed between us that could not be unchanged. A door opened that could not be closed, no matter how many miles of propriety and grief he tried to stack against it. Saturday came. I had not packed. I had not taken the money. The envelope sat on my table like an accusation, and every time I looked at it, I heard Lady Catherine's voice. You will be ruined, and felt the truth of it settle deeper into my bones. What I did not expect was Mr. Pemberton. The steward arrived at my cottage at 9 in the morning with a document and a tight, satisfied smile, but told me everything I needed to know before he opened his mouth. Notice of eviction, he said, placing the paper on my table beside the envelope. Signed by the estate solicitor, authorized by the Dowager Duchess, under her retained rights to the dower properties. You have 48 hours. Does the Duke know? The Duke is in London. He departed this morning for a matter of business that could not wait. Pemberton's smile widened. He is expected to be gone a week. Lady Catherine thought it best not to trouble him with household details. She had planned it perfectly. Send him away on business, execute the eviction in his absence, and present him with a completed fact upon his return. By the time James, the Duke, came back, I would be gone. The cottage would be empty again, and the whole episode could be treated as a minor trespass, resolved quietly, requiring no further discussion. I looked at Pemberton and saw the same cold calculation I had seen in Uncle Edwin's study, in Margaret's dining room, in every place where someone with power had looked at me and seen a problem to be managed, rather than a person to be considered. 48 hours, he repeated, and left. I packed. What else could I do? I had no legal claim. The eviction was valid. Lady Catherine's dower rights were beyond dispute, and I had no lease, no contract, no written permission from anyone. I was a woman who had moved into someone else's home and been tolerated through kindness that had now been overruled. I wrapped the few things I had acquired, the mended curtains, the chipped cup, the battered cowper he had left on my doorstep. I cleaned the cottage until it shone, and on Saturday evening I went to the garden one last time. The roses had bloomed. I had not expected it so late in the season, but there they were. 3 blooms along the south wall, deep crimson against the grey stone, impossibly vivid, impossibly alive. Charlotte's roses, resurrected from soil everyone had abandoned. I knelt beside them and pressed my face into the nearest bloom and breathed. And the scent was so sweet and so unbearable that I finally broke. I cried. I cried for my father, and for the life I had lost, and for the 5 months in my uncle's house, and for the man who had said my name like it was the most dangerous word he knew. I cried because the roots were alive, and the roses had bloomed, and none of it mattered. Because the world was not built for women like me to keep beautiful things. I did not hear the horse. Eleanor. I turned, still on my knees in the dirt, my face wet, my hands full of earth. And he was there. Standing at the gate in riding clothes, his horse lathered and breathing hard behind him, as though he had ridden from London without stopping. "Mrs. Calloway sent word," he said. His voice was barely controlled. "She sent a boy on the fastest horse in the stable. He reached me at Southwark. You should not have come back. Do not tell me what I should do." He came through the gate in 3 strides and dropped to one knee in front of me. A duke in the dirt, eye level with a penniless woman who was crying in his dead wife's garden. My mother had no right. She had every right. The dower properties. I am the Duke of Ashworth. His voice cracked on his own title, as though it were a weapon he despised using, but would use now, for this, for me. This is my land, my estate, my decision, not hers, not Pemberton's, mine. And what is your decision? He stared at me. The storm in his eyes had broken open, not cold, not controlled, but wild, desperate, unguarded. I could see the grief and the terror and the want and the fury all fighting for the same space. And I understood in that moment that this man had not felt anything in 3 years and was now feeling everything at once and did not know how to survive it. "Stay," he said. The word sounded like it was torn from somewhere deep inside him. "Eleanor, stay. Your mother will learn to endure what she cannot control. Society has been whispering about me since Charlotte died. Let them whisper about something worth discussing. You swore, after her, you swore never again." He reached out and took my hands, both of them, dirt and all. His grip was firm, warm, slightly trembling, and he held on as though I were the last solid thing in a world that had been crumbling beneath him for years. "I was wrong," he said. "I thought the safest thing I could do was never feel again. And then you knelt in a dead garden and brought her roses back to life. And I understood that I had been burying myself alongside her." His thumbs moved across my knuckles. "I am done burying things, Eleanor. I am done letting the dead things win." He did not kiss me in the garden, not then. What he did was harder, braver, and far more devastating. He stood. He pulled me to my feet and he walked me back to the main house. In full view of the grounds, the stable hands, the gardeners finishing their evening work, and Lady Catherine herself, who was watching from the morning room window. He walked me through the front door. Not the servants' entrance, not a side passage. The front door of Ashworth Hall, with its marble columns and ancestral portraits, and 300 years of dukes and duchesses who would have fainted at the sight of a physician's daughter crossing that threshold on the current duke's arm. Mrs. Calloway met us in the entrance hall. She looked at our linked hands, at the dirt on both our knees, at the expression on his face, and she said nothing. She simply nodded, as though a long-delayed inevitability had finally arrived. Lady Catherine appeared at the top of the staircase. "James." Her voice could have cut glass. "What are you doing?" He looked up at his mother, and I felt his hand tighten around mine. "I am correcting an injustice committed in my name," he said. "Miss Graves is a guest in this house. She will be treated accordingly. Her cottage will remain hers for as long as she wishes it. She is nobody. She has no family, no fortune, no... She has me." The words echoed in the marble hall. I felt them reverberate through my hand, up my arm, into the center of my chest where they lodged like something permanent. Lady Catherine's face went white. "You are being a fool," she whispered. "Quite possibly," James said. But I have been a corpse for 3 years, Mother, and I find I prefer the fool. What followed was not simple. I will not pretend it was. Lady Catherine remained at the estate for another week, and every meal was a battlefield fought with silver cutlery and devastating politeness. She did not shout. She did not weep. She waged her campaign with silence, with pointed references to Charlotte, with dinner invitations extended to every eligible daughter in the county, each one more beautiful and more suitable than the last. James endured it with a patience I found almost painful to witness. He did not argue with his mother. He did not defend me to her face. But every morning he walked to the cottage, and every evening we walked the ridge together, and every day the distance between us, the careful, proper, excruciating distance, grew thinner. The village talked. Of course it talked. Mrs. Calloway reported the gossip with the air of someone reading casualty lists. "They are calling you the cottage woman," she told me. "The kinder ones say you must be a distant relation. The less kind ones say considerably worse." "And what do you say, Mrs. Calloway?" She looked at me with those sharp, assessing eyes. "I say that I have worked in this house for 22 years, and I have not seen His Grace walk with his head up since the Duchess died. Until now." Pemberton struck again on a Wednesday. I returned to the cottage after a walk to find my door open, my trunk pulled to the center of the room, and a letter pinned to the table. Not an eviction this time. Something worse. A letter from my uncle. In Pemberton's hand, the steward's neat script on the envelope's direction. He had written to Edwin. He had told him where I was. Uncle Edwin's response was brief and poisonous. He demanded my immediate return to Hertfordshire. He claimed legal authority as my nearest male relative. He implied, in language just careful enough to avoid explicit accusation, that I had fled his household under circumstances that reflected poorly on my character, and that any man sheltering me should be made aware of my instability. Pemberton had delivered the letter to Lady Catherine first. I knew this because, when I arrived at the main house, shaking with fury and terror, I found her in the drawing room with the letter already open on the table before her, and a look of settled triumph on her face. "Your uncle is concerned for your welfare," she said. My uncle is a man who came to my bedroom door at night. The room went silent. Lady Catherine's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes shifted. A flicker of recognition she immediately suppressed. "That is a serious accusation." "It is the truth, and Mr. Pemberton knows it because I told the vicar's wife in Thornash, who told Mrs. Calloway, who has no doubt told anyone willing to listen. Your steward did not write to my uncle out of concern. He wrote to provide you with a weapon." "Lower your voice, Miss Graves." "No." The door opened. James stood in the threshold, still in his riding coat, his face a mask of barely contained fury. He looked at his mother. He looked at the letter on the table. He looked at me. "Who wrote to her uncle?" His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes detonation. "Mr. Pemberton," I said. James crossed the room in 4 strides, picked up the letter, and read it. I watched his expression darken with every line, the jaw tightening, the color leaving his face, replaced by something cold and absolute. He set the letter down very gently. He turned to his mother. "You knew about this?" "James, you read this letter. You saw what this man implied about a woman under my protection. And you were going to use it." He was not shouting. His voice had dropped to a register I had never heard. Low, lethal. utterly controlled. Pemberton is dismissed, effective immediately, without reference. You cannot dismiss the steward over a... I can dismiss anyone in my employment who conspires to harm a guest in my house. Pemberton leaves today. He paused. And mother, if you cannot treat Miss Graves with the respect due to someone I care for, then I will understand if you find the country air no longer suits your health. Lady Catherine stared at her son. I saw the moment she understood. Not that she had lost the battle, but that the battle had been over long before she arrived. That this was not infatuation, or foolishness, or grief-muddled confusion. That her son had chosen, and his choice was standing in her drawing room with dirt under her fingernails and fire in her eyes. And no amount of money or maneuvering was going to change it. She left the estate the following morning. She did not say goodbye to me, but she paused at the carriage door, turned to James, and said something I did not hear. He told me later. She said she had better be worth it. 3 days after his mother's departure, James came to the cottage at dusk. The roses were in their final bloom, late, improbable, glorious against the grey October stone. He stood in the garden and looked at me, and this time there was no storm in his eyes, only clarity. The kind of clarity that comes after a man has torn down every wall he built and is standing in the open air for the first time in years. I have something for you, he said. He reached into his coat and produced a small leather journal, worn soft with age. I opened it. The pages were filled with a woman's handwriting, elegant, slightly rushed, full of sketches of plants and notes on soil and sunlight. Charlotte's garden journal, he said. She kept it the year she planted the roses. I found it in my study the morning after you came to the house. It had been in a drawer I had not opened since she died. I turned the pages carefully. Near the back, a passage caught my eye. Not about roses, but about the cottage itself. This little house deserves someone who will love what grows here. When I am gone, and I know I will be gone before these roses climb the wall, I hope whoever finds this place has the courage to stay. My throat closed. She would have liked you, James said. She would have liked that you fought to stay. I closed the journal and looked up at him. James. Yes? I'm going to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you speak. He nodded. I am nobody. I have £11 to my name, no family worth claiming, and the reputation that I now is thoroughly compromised. I bring you nothing. No alliance, no fortune, no political advantage. Every rational argument says you should let me go. Eleanor, you said you would let me finish. He pressed his lips together. His hands were shaking. But I love you, I said. I love you in a way I did not know I was capable of. And if you send me away, I will survive it because I have survived everything else. But I will not pretend it would not break something in me that your dead wife's roses brought back to life. He kissed me, not gently, not tentatively. He crossed the distance between us in a single step and took my face in both hands and kissed me with 3 years of silence and grief and loneliness pouring through him. And I kissed him back with everything I had. Every rootless, homeless, desperate month, every night I had spent in other people's houses praying for a place that was mine. Every evening I had watched his solitary figure on the ridge and wanted to call out to him. When we broke apart, his forehead rested against mine, and his breath came ragged and warm against my lips. "Marry me," he said. "Your mother will be furious. My mother will survive. Society will talk. Let them talk until they are hoarse. I do not care. I have spent 3 years caring about nothing, and I am finished with it." He pulled back enough to look at me, and his eyes were bright and fierce and undone. "Marry me, Eleanor, not because it is proper or strategic or wise. Marry me because the roots are alive and the roses are blooming, and I cannot spend another day pretending I am still buried." "Yes," I said. He laughed. I had never heard him laugh. A real laugh, startled and rough and full. And the sound of it cracked something open in the evening air, something that had been sealed shut for a very long time. We married in December, in the chapel at Ashworth Hall, with Mrs. Calloway crying into her handkerchief, the vicar beaming, and Lady Catherine sitting in the front pew in a new silk gown, her expression carefully neutral, which, as Mrs. Calloway whispered, was the closest she would ever come to approval. It was a small wedding. No London society, no grand announcement, no political manoeuvring. Just the household, the village, and 2 people who had found each other in a dead garden and chosen to stay. That night, I stood at the window of a bedroom I still could not believe was mine, and looked out over the south meadow. The cottage glowed faintly in the moonlight, its stone walls silver, its garden dark and sleeping. James came to stand behind me. His arms circled my waist, and I leaned back against his chest, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt the absence of fear. Not happiness, that was there too, enormous and almost overwhelming, but the absence of the thing that had lived in my chest since my father died. The constant, grinding terror of having nowhere to belong. "What are you thinking?" he murmured against my hair. "That she was right," I said. "Charlotte. She wrote that the cottage deserved someone with the courage to stay." His arms tightened. "And you stayed." I stayed. Below us, invisible in the dark, the roses slept along the south wall, roots deep, branches strong, waiting for spring to begin again.